My sister, Emily, and her husband, James, were in dire straits last year. James lost his warehouse job at the start of the COVID pandemic, and they were facing the very real possibility of being homeless. They'd always lived paycheck to paycheck, figuring their combined income was enough to cover their expenses, especially since they didn't have kids. Any extra costs were usually covered by picking up odd jobs here and there. Now, I'm not going to lie. I'm pretty careful with money. I have a good job in finance, and I've always lived by a strict, no money dealings with family rule. Call me paranoid, but I've seen how quickly loans and business deals can turn sour between loved ones. I'd much rather keep my family relationships intact, thank you very much. Emily knew all this, knew how I felt about mixing family and finances, but there she was. One day, standing in my doorway, tears streaming down her face, begging for $40,000. They were drowning in debt, she explained, and had absolutely nowhere else to turn. Seeing her like that, so desperate, really got to me. We'd always been close, never had any major disagreements. The thought of her living out of her car, all because of some stupid virus and a mountain of bills, it just broke my heart. She initially asked for $60,000, which honestly sounded ridiculous. I had my own family to think about, my own bills to pay, but she was adamant about needing at least $40,000, and in the end, I caved. She promised to pay me back, and being my sister, my own flesh and blood, I couldn't bring myself to charge her any interest. Looking back, I know I made a mistake. My first mistake was not drawing up a proper contract. I should have had something legally binding to ensure she'd repay me on time. But she was so emotional, so distraught, that I let my own emotions get the better of me. I threw caution to the wind and just handed over the money. And that, my friends, was the beginning of my very expensive lesson in why you should never lend money to family. We agreed on a repayment plan, $5,000 a month for 8 months. She claimed she couldn't afford quarterly payments, so I figured, fine, 6 months is a long time, but it's doable. The pandemic was still raging, jobs were scarce, and I understood it might take time for her to get back on her feet. Besides, she was my sister. I trusted her. For the first couple of months, everything seemed fine. She'd call regularly, keep me updated on their situation, and generally be her usual, loving self. She'd tell me how grateful she was, how much she appreciated my help, all that warm and fuzzy stuff. It made me feel good, like I'd done the right thing. But then, slowly, the calls became less frequent. The texts dwindled. By the 5th month, I hadn't heard from her in weeks. I tried not to worry. Maybe they were just busy, I told myself. Emily wasn't the type to just take the money and run. She knew how important family was to me, and she wouldn't risk ruining our relationship over something like this. 6 months came and went. I finally called her, and she assured me the money would be in my account within a week. Something in her voice sounded off, but I brushed it aside. I didn't want to start an argument, didn't want to create any tension. I called every day that week, and each time she'd say the same thing. Be patient, you'll have it by Monday. Sometimes she'd get annoyed, tell me to stop hounding her. But hey, it was $40,000. That's not chump change. That's a year's salary for some people. I had every right to be concerned. Monday arrived, and guess what? Blocked. Not just her phone number, but every social media account she had. I was furious, disappointed, betrayed. I told my wife, Sarah, about the whole thing, and she was just as shocked as I was. Turns out, Emily had specifically asked me to keep the loan a secret from Sarah. She didn't want anyone knowing about their financial troubles, and with Sarah, well, let's just say she has a knack for spreading news faster than wildfire. But now, not only had Emily blocked me, she'd blocked Sarah and the kids too. I was beyond angry. I called James, but he didn't answer. Tried again, and lo and behold, blocked again. It was clear they were avoiding me. Something was definitely wrong. I was at my wit's end. I couldn't believe my sister, my own blood, could do this to me. She'd lied, manipulated me, and now she was ghosting me. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. I knew I needed to talk to someone, get some advice. But who? I couldn't tell my parents, not yet. I didn't want to cause a family feud. And I didn't want to go to the police. That would just make things worse. So, I turned to my younger brother, Ben. He was always level-headed, always had good advice. I explained the whole situation to him, and he was just as shocked as I was. "She can't do this, man," he said, his voice filled with anger. "She can't just take your money and disappear." "I know," I sighed, feeling drained. "But what can I do? I can't force her to pay me back." Ben thought for a moment. "Have you tried going to her house?" he asked. "Maybe she's there." I hadn't thought of that, but it was worth a shot. I called James, my sister's husband, and asked if he knew where she was. He hesitated, then admitted that Emily hadn't been home in a few days. He didn't know where she was, but he'd call me if he heard anything. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the past few months in my head, trying to make sense of it all. I felt betrayed, used, and completely helpless. I just wanted my money back, nothing more. The next day, I decided to go to Emily's house myself. I didn't expect her to be there, but maybe I could talk to James, or maybe I could leave a note. I drove to her house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, the house was empty. There was no sign of Emily or James. I walked around the backyard, hoping to find some clue, but there was nothing. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a window on the second floor was open. I hesitated, then decided to climb up the ladder. I could see inside, and there was Emily, sitting on her bed, crying. I knocked on the window and she jumped. When she saw me, her face turned pale. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm here to get my money back," I said, my voice steady. She looked away, her eyes filled with shame. "I'm sorry, John," she said quietly. "I know I screwed up. I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, waiting for her to explain herself. "I know I promised to pay you back, and I know I should have, but things got really tough," she said. "James lost his job, and we've been struggling to make ends meet. I used the money to pay the rent and buy groceries. I know it was wrong, but I didn't have any other choice." I listened to her, but I wasn't convinced. Her story didn't add up. She had been posting pictures on social media of fancy vacations and expensive dinners. Where did the money for that come from? "Emily," I said, "I'm not going to lie to you. I don't believe your story. You've been lying to me from the start." She looked away, her face flushed. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I just didn't know what else to do." I sighed. "I can't help you, Emily," I said. "You're going to have to figure this out on your own." I turned and left the house, feeling a mixture of anger, disappointment, and sadness. I had trusted my sister, and she had betrayed me. I knew I would never be able to trust her again. I drove home with a knot in my stomach. Seeing Emily like that, broken and pleading, it almost made me want to give her another chance. But then I remembered the pictures Ben's wife had shown us. Emily lounging on a beach in Miami, sipping cocktails, living the high life. It made my blood boil. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lies, the betrayal, the way she'd manipulated my emotions. She'd played the victim, sobbed about how hard things were, while secretly spending my money on frivolous trips and God knows what else. I told Sarah everything. She was furious, more so than I'd ever seen her. "That's it," she declared. "We're going to her house, tonight." Ben and his wife joined us. We drove over to Emily's in the evening, figuring they'd be home by then. I wasn't going to play nice anymore. I was done being understanding. I wanted my money back, and I wanted answers. We found them having dinner. The minute Emily saw us, her face went white. She knew she was caught. She tried to invite us in, but we barged past her, our anger palpable. At that point, I didn't care about preserving our relationship. It was already shattered. Ben, bless his soul, went straight for the jugular. "So, how was Miami?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Emily tried to play dumb, but Ben's wife whipped out her phone and showed Emily the incriminating pictures. Busted. The tears came then, the apologies, the whole 9 yards, but I just stared at her, cold and unmoved. I wasn't falling for her crocodile tears again. James tried to explain, stammering about how they were going to pay me back, but then a friend's wedding came up, and they dipped into the money. It was a pathetic excuse. I was disgusted. I couldn't even look at her. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I marched into her bedroom and took some of her jewelry. It looked new, expensive, probably worth at least $10,000. "This is Collateral," I told her, my voice shaking with rage. "You have 2 weeks to pay me back or I'm calling the cops." We left, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. As soon as we got home, Emily called Ben's wife, screaming at her for ratting her out and demanding she pay for the missing jewelry. Sarah snatched the phone and told her to return the damn money or face the consequences. Emily hung up and, predictably, blocked her too. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just call the cops right then and there? Well, things were a bit more complicated than that. See, Emily had taken the money from me back in March, right when our state government issued the stay-at-home order. The pandemic was in full swing, and I couldn't exactly go barging into her house demanding money when we were supposed to be isolating. It wasn't until September, when the vaccines finally became available, that things started to open up again. I got vaccinated as soon as I could, but it still took a couple of months for things to settle down. By the time I went to Emily's house, it was already December, and to be fair, things were looking up for them. James had found a new job, and with everyone getting vaccinated, life was slowly returning to normal. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to pay me back. But then, things took another turn. Just as we thought the pandemic was behind us, a new variant emerged, and cases started to rise again. Lockdowns were reimposed, and businesses started closing down. It felt like we were back to square one. Amidst all this chaos, I was still trying to get my money back from Emily. It had been 3 months since my ultimatum, and I'd only received $27,000. Add in the value of the jewelry I'd taken, and I was still owed around $6,000. One day, James showed up at my doorstep, looking sheepish and defeated. He confessed that they'd blown through most of the $40,000. They'd taken out another loan from a friend, gone to a cousin's wedding, and somehow managed to spend even more than they had. Now, they were deeper in debt than ever before. He apologized profusely, swore on his life that they were trying their best to repay me. He even offered a new repayment plan, $9,000 a month until the debt was cleared. I listened to him, but honestly, I felt numb. The whole ordeal had taken its toll on me. I was tired of the lies, the drama, the constant stress. And more than anything, I was hurt by Emily's actions. I couldn't understand how she could treat me, her own brother, this way. I agreed to James's repayment plan, but I made it clear that I wanted nothing more to do with Emily. I couldn't forgive her, not after everything she'd put me through. It's been a few months since then, and James has been true to his word. He's been making the payments on time, and I'm slowly starting to recoup my losses. But the whole experience has left a bitter taste in my mouth. I've learned my lesson. Never lend money to family, no matter how desperate they seem. It's just not worth the risk. It's been a while since this whole mess started, and I've had a lot of time to reflect on what happened. I still can't believe my own sister would deceive me like that. The lies, the manipulation, the sheer audacity of it all. It still stings. But I've also realized that I'm not entirely blameless in this situation. I let my emotions cloud my judgment. I should have been more cautious, more practical. I should have drawn up a contract, set clear boundaries, and maybe, just maybe, this whole thing could have been avoided. I've learned a valuable lesson about family and finances. It's a dangerous mix, a recipe for disaster. I'll never lend money to a family member again, no matter how dire their circumstances. It's simply not worth jeopardizing the relationship. As for Emily, well, we haven't spoken since that night at her house. I don't know if we ever will. Part of me wants to forgive her, to move on, to rebuild our bond. But another part of me can't let go of the hurt, the betrayal. Maybe, someday, we'll be able to talk things through, to find some kind of resolution. But for now, I'm focusing on my own family, my own life. I'm trying to put this whole ordeal behind me and move forward. I know it won't be easy. The scars of this experience will likely stay with me for a long time. But I'm determined to heal, to learn from my mistakes, and to come out of this stronger than before. And who knows, maybe this whole experience will serve as a cautionary tale for others. Maybe it will prevent someone else from making the same mistakes I did. If that's the case, then maybe, just maybe, something good can come out of all this pain. Story 2. My parents concealed my inheritance, choose my brother above me, and are now looking to me for assistance. When my brother tried to seize their house, which was truly mine, and smacked me at my son's birthday party, my parents stood by him after his deceitful betrayal. They begged for help years later. I am 35 million, and my younger brother Eric is 28 million. It was tough for me to grow up in a household where favoritism was so obvious. My parents acted as if Eric were a precious gem that needed to be protected at all costs. Since the day of his birth, even though I was just present, I remember that Eric's cold caused my 10th birthday celebration to be canceled. Since he simply had a cold, not even a fever, they couldn't take the chance of feeling left out of the celebrations. Things only got worse as we grew older. In addition to being a straight A student and captain of the debate team, my SAT scores earned me a partial scholarship. But my parents didn't really notice. They were too busy congratulating Eric for earning C grades in his classes. At each parent-teacher conference, the same thing occurred. They would focus on how they might help Eric and improve, ignoring my successes. I left when I was 18, determined to prosper without their constant comparison. After working many jobs to pay for my studies, I obtained a degree in computer technology and landed a great job at a software company. That's where I met my wife, Darla, 33F. She is compassionate, smart, and unlike my family, she actually recognizes my achievements. We were married 5 years ago, and James is our 1-year-old child. But Eric stayed inside the home all the time, after a semester. At the age of 28, he went home after leaving community college because it was too stressful. He still resides with our parents and works part-time at a video game store in the area. He plays video games a lot of the time. My parents are solely responsible for this. His food, bills, car insurance, and gaming subscriptions are all paid for by them. When I mentioned that Eric might want to seek for a full-time job, my mother physically started crying because she felt that I was being too harsh on her delicate young child. Last month, we celebrated James's first birthday at my parents' house. I didn't want to, but they insisted. Mom said it would mean a lot to Eric to be a part of his nephew's special day. Even though I should have known better, I accepted in an effort to keep the peace. The festivities began in a respectable manner. We decorate the lawn with balloons and streamers. Up until midday, James was having a terrific time with his loved ones. It was everything going well. I had piled my plate high with food and was looking around for Darla. I turned around and accidentally ran into Eric, who was standing just behind me at that very time. Some of my meal, which was spaghetti with marinara sauce, ended up on his new limited edition gaming t-shirt. I immediately apologized and offered to purchase him a new shirt or even cover the cost of dry cleaning because I knew that gaming equipment may be expensive. Eric lost it. He started screaming that I always destroy things for him instead of accepting my apology. His cheeks flushing, he recounted times in our childhood when he said I deliberately tried to hurt him, as when I tripped over the cable on his gaming system and damaged it. He was 5 and I was 12. Or I was helping to put up his party, so I hadn't eaten all day when I got the last piece of pizza at his 10th birthday celebration. There was silence in the room. Everyone was focused on us. Before I could defend myself, Eric slapped me hard across the face. The boom echoed, and the room was quiet. Far though my cheek stung, what happened next hurt far more. Instead of checking on me, my mother rushed over to fuss about Eric. She started asking him how he was doing and whether he needed ice for his hand. My dad just stood there with his arms crossed and looked at me disapprovingly after slapping me like I had done something wrong. I looked around the room. My wife was standing there in disbelief, holding James, who had started to cry from the turmoil. Others spoke to one another, while others looked aside awkwardly. Our mother was consoling Eric while I stood there with a crimson stain on my cheek. I questioned my parents if they really thought it was okay for their son to be assaulted during his own child's birthday party. My mother's response when I finally found my voice was, "You should know better. You're older. Take a look at his new clothing that you altered." I lost it at that moment. Years of suppressed aggravation were let loose. You know how much he loves his gaming merchandise? He saved for weeks to acquire it. I informed them that they had permitted Eric to behave in this manner all of his life. They had never held him accountable for anything, chastised him, or urged him to do better. I pointed out that he was still playing video games and living at home at the age of 28. I mentioned that Eric had a gaming competition that day, and I had worked hard to establish my life since I was 18. As a result, they had missed my college graduation and hardly helped with my wedding, since they were so busy making sure Eric didn't feel left out. How being near babies made Eric uneasy. As a result, they had only visited James twice since his birth. My father became upset and told me to leave their house if I couldn't respect my brother. I did just that. I picked up my son, informed my wife we were leaving, and headed out. My mother started crying because of Eric's current state of distress. Not that I had plans to go. Later that day, the texts and calls started rolling in. I had to tell Eric I was sorry. I was told over the phone by my parents. It seems that he was so upset over his ruined clothing that he locked himself in his room and refused to go. Some family members contacted to inform me that I should have avoided upsetting Eric by dropping food on him, since I should have known he was sensitive. Other messages claim that I should be more tolerant because I'm the elder brother, Eric, and I blocked my parents and the family members that supported him. I was being theatrical about a minor smack. Some family members who were there when it happened said they supported me, and that they had always witnessed the harsh treatment I received, but had kept quiet to avoid making a commotion. Too little, too late. A month has now gone by. My wife fully supports my choice to stop communicating. I never want James to think that hitting people is okay, or that he has to put up with abuse because it comes from his family, she said. Some relatives argue that I am being too harsh, and that I should forgive Eric because he is my younger brother. However, just because we are connected, I don't see why. I should endure abuse for a while longer. First off, it's been 2 years since I last spoke to my family. Peace has come to life because of their ceaseless drama. James, who is 3 years old, is doing well. Furthermore, we have a daughter named Emma, who is 6 months old. Along with getting a bigger house and promotions at work, Darla and I have been happy with our life as a family of 4. Last week, when I got a call from an unknown number, everything changed. The tears were streaming down my mother's face. I had trouble understanding her because of her sobs. I was initially taken aback by what I heard, until she finally calmed down enough to speak. After somehow transferring ownership of their property into his name, Eric was selling it. He had given them 2 weeks' notice to leave. The greatest shock wasn't even that they had nowhere to go. The fact that the house had actually always been in my name astounded me. Mom says, "When my grandpa passed away 15 years ago, he left the house to me in his will. Due to their own ambitions, I had just begun college at the age of 20. I was never informed of this bequest by my parents. They had been waiting for the ideal moment to inform me that they wanted Eric to eventually own the house, hoping to convince me to give it to him when he was more stable. For 15 years, they lived in my house without claiming it as their own. While I worked many jobs to pay for my own place, they let Eric live there for free for 15 years. They concealed the fact that I struggled to accumulate money for a down payment on my first house for 15 years. Mom broke down in tears as she described how they never thought Eric would be so unfaithful to them. He had been acting strangely for a few months. He had apparently started talking about relocating to a distant state to live with some friends who were avid online gamers. They needed money for a game setup and streaming gear. It was then that he started asking who owned the house. I still don't understand how Eric was able to register the house in his name. During their trip last month, he handled the paperwork. Mom kept saying that since I never signed any transfer forms, I can only assume he forged my signature. The irony of the situation is almost comical, because the house was actually mine. I'm being begged for help by the same parents who kicked me out of their house 2 years ago. After attacking me at my son's birthday party, the brother has now betrayed them by trying to steal my possessions. They had spent all of their savings on Eric over the years, including paying for his failed college attempt, buying his gaming gear, paying for his insurance and car payments, and even paying for his convention attendance. Mom spent an hour on the phone discussing their impending homelessness and the fact that they had nowhere else to go. She also revealed that after I stopped talking to Eric, his behavior deteriorated. He announced that he was quitting his job entirely to pursue a career as a professional gamer. He streamed to his small online fan base while playing games all day. When they suggested he look for a job, he would throw fits at night, smash things, and threaten to move out. My dad answered the phone too. He made an effort to justify their actions by saying that they only had the best interests of their 2 sons in mind, that they had planned to eventually inform me of the bequest, and that they never thought Eric would behave in such a manner. He even went so far as to suggest that perhaps none of this would have occurred if I had kept in touch without saying anything. I hung up. I received numerous calls from other family members begging with me to aid my parents. Some folks made an effort to guilt-trip me by bringing up their elderly age and frailty. Others felt I was being just as nasty as Eric by not assisting them. Darla argues that since they are still my parents and appear to really lament their circumstances, we ought to aid them. But I find it impossible to sympathize. For 15 years, they mislead me about my own property. While I put a lot of effort into obtaining my own home, they permitted their golden kid to stay there for free. When he attacked me in front of my family, they stood up for him. The only reason they called me now was to ask for anything to find out how Eric was able to acquire the home in his name. I got in touch with a lawyer. The attorney confirmed to the fact that my grandfather's will did, in fact, leave me the house, because I never completed any transfer documents. She is studying the documentation Eric used to transfer the property and decides that his claim to the house would not stand up in court. She suggested that we may bring a case against him for forgery. I'm unsure right now since my parents are still my parents. In spite of everything, I have a part of me that wants to assist them. But because they lied to me and let Eric keep doing this for so long, I also think they deserve this. Maybe this is the reminder they've been waiting for to understand their cherished golden child's actual character. First update. My lawyer helped me reclaim the house, even if it wasn't easy. Eric had, in fact, forged my signature on several documents. He also lied to other agencies and falsely claimed to have my power of attorney. The house is back in my name after Eric was evicted following over 3 months of court processes. I learned more about what actually happened throughout the court proceedings. Eric had been planning this for months. He had found the will of my grandpa. He started looking at options to transfer property ownership while going through our parents' old documents. When I discovered that the house was legally mine, he even joined numerous online groups on real estate fraud using a false identity. The forged documents were of very high quality. My lawyer believes that Eric should have gotten help from a property law specialist. We then learned that he had been paying an online consultant using money he had stolen from our parents, which he said was for gaming equipment. When the cops showed there to remove him, Eric lost it all and refused to leave his room. Hours of negotiating later, he consented to leave. When there was a threat of breaking the door, he would not stop screaming that everyone was against him and that we were all trying to ruin his life. My parents encouraged me to let them stay in the house. They got my address from a relative, came to my house, and really passed out in the driveway. Mom sobbed. There's nowhere else for them to go. I had never seen my dad weep before, and he was expressing regret for hiding the truth about my inheritance, including loans they had taken out to fund Eric's gaming career. They admitted that they had spent all of their retirement money on him. Expensive gaming environments, auto insurance, automobile payments, and the tuition for the 1 semester he was enrolled in college. They had honestly believed that he would eventually become a successful streamer and pay them back. Dad finally admitted they had overindulged Eric. He claims that I blacklisted his phone and saved all of his threatening messages in case we needed them later. When I last heard from Eric, he was couch surfing at the homes of his gaming friends. It seems that when his online friends found out he was broke, his grand plans to move in with them fell through. After Mom revealed how Eric had misled them about the transfer of the house, he had convinced them it was just a formality to help him start a gaming business. He promised to take care of them forever once he became a popular streamer. They trusted their infant kid because they wanted to be sure he wouldn't betray them. After discussing it with Darla, I decided to allow them to remain with certain limitations to remind them that they are now living in my house and that they must pay rent, which is below market value, because they are now on a fixed income. Second, they have to attend family therapy if they want to communicate with me or their grandkids in any way. Third, they are never permitted to let Eric into the house without my permission. Eric did not take the eviction well. He started threatening me, Darla, our parents, and everyone else. Since it was his home and he had nowhere else to go, he urged that I let him go back, accusing me of destroying his life and turning his parents against him. I blacklisted his phone and saved all of his threatening messages in case we needed them later. When I last heard from Eric, he was couch surfing at the homes of his gaming friends. It seems that when his online friends found out he was broke, his grand plans to move in with them fell through. Other family members suggested that I help him because he is my brother, but I refused. He tried to take my house via fraud and forgeries. I don't think he's my brother anymore. The third update. The past 6 months have been fascinating. My parents have been paying their rent on time and attending treatment as per their agreement. It's a slow process, but they are trying to restore our friendship. Every week, more information about the many ways their favoritism hurt both of their boys is revealed. Mom finally said that they regretted letting Eric. It appears that they were struggling financially at the time of Eric's birth, which prevented them from giving him the same comforts I had throughout my formative years. To compensate, they started to overindulge him. What started off as buying him more toys turned into a lifetime of accepting misbehaving. When Dad witnessed how their actions turned Eric into an entitled monster and alienated me during one therapy session, he lost it. He said that they had a sneaking suspicion that I would be okay because I was a responsible and hardworking employee. Because they felt that Eric needed more help to succeed in life, they focused all of their attention on him. Last month, Eric sent me a lengthy email. He claimed to have been attending treatment as well and to have accepted his mistakes. He says he hit his lowest moment after getting evicted. None of his gaming friends wanted to adopt him permanently, and his streaming career never really took off. In the moment, he works in a warehouse and lives in an apartment with 3 other people. In the email, Eric expressed regret for his attempts to steal the house, for forging my signature, and attacking James on his birthday. He said that the therapy helped him realize how his parents' prejudice had warped his view of the world. He requested permission to reside with our parents once more and pledged to pay the rent this time. I declined his request. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, who recommended that I cease corresponding with him due to his history of dishonesty. I worked hard to get everything else in my life, even though I inherited the house. I will no longer put up with his conduct, even if he claims to have changed. Some family members still criticize me for charging my elderly parents rent. They say I'm being cruel and that families should help one another out without compensation. But this isn't about money. It's about limits and consequences. My brother was mistreated. My parents hid my inheritance for 15 years, and they only apologized when they wanted anything from me. That I'm letting them stay at all is a blessing. Mom still talks about Eric's struggles now and then. Last week, she warned that since he was unable to pay his car payment, he may lose his vehicle. Telling her that he is an adult who tried to cheat me out of my home promptly put an end to it. They can help him if they want to, but not while living in my house. Darla thinks I'm being fair when she suggests that we invite them to supper once in a while so they can see their grandkids. James occasionally asks about his grandparents. I'm considering it, but I'm not ready for regular family gatherings just yet. Still, the betrayal is too fresh. For now, this configuration is effective. My parents have a safe place to live. I have control over my property, and Eric is finally accepting the consequences of his actions. Sometimes, family ties may be strengthened by setting clear boundaries and enforcing consequences. I have learned that family does not mean being taken advantage of. It means being accountable to each other and honoring each other's boundaries. The end? I appreciate you watching. Please click the notification bell if you haven't already in order to receive updates on additional startling real-life stories that are happening in your area.